Chapter 19. 2 or 3 days and nights went by. I reckon I might say they swum by. They did slid along so quiet and smooth and lovely. Here's the way we put it in the time. It was a monstrous big river down there, sometimes a mile and a half wide. We run nights and laid up and hid most times during the day. Soon as night was most gone, we stopped navigating and tied up, nearly always in the dead water or under a towhead. And then we cut young cottonwoods and willows and hid the raft with them. Then we set out the lines. Next we slid into the river and had a swim, so as to freshen up and cool off. Then we sat down on the sandy bottom, where the water was about knee-deep, and watched the daylight come. Not a sound anywheres. Perfectly still. Just like the whole world was asleep. But sometimes the bullfrogs a-clutterin' maybe. The first thing to see, looking away over the water, was a kind of dull line. It was on the woods to the other side. You couldn't make out nothing else. Then a pale place in the sky. And then more paleness spreading around. And then the river softened up away off. And weren't black anymore, but gray. And you could see little dark spots drifting along ever so far away, trading scows and such things. And long black streaks, rafts. Sometimes you could hear a sweep squeaking, or jumbled up voices. It was so still, and the sounds come so far. And by, you could see a streak on the water, which you know by the look of that streak that there's a snag there in a swift current which breaks on it. Maybe I was allergic to the cottonwoods. Actually, I think I am a little allergic to cottonwood. That's a different story. But there's a snag there. And there's a swift current which breaks on it and makes that streak look like it looked that way. And you see the mist curl up off the water, and the east reddens, and the river, and you make out a log cabin on the edge of the woods, away on the bank to the other side of the river, being a woodyard likely, and piled up by them cheats so you can throw a dog through it anywheres. And then the nice breeze springs up and comes fanning you from over there, so cool and fresh and sweet to smell on account of the woods and the flowers. But sometimes not that way, because they left dead fish lying around and gars and such, and they do get pretty rank. And the next you've got the full day, and everything smiling in the sun, and the songbirds just a-going in. A little smoke couldn't be noticed now, so we would take some fish off the lines and cook up a hot breakfast. And afterwards we would watch the lonesomeness of the river, and just kind of lazy along, and by lazy off to sleep, and wake up by and by, and look to see what had done it, and maybe see a steamboat coughing up the other upstream, so far off towards the other side, you couldn't tell nothing about her, only whether she was a stern wheel or a side wheel. Then only for about an hour. There wouldn't be nothing to hear, nor nothing to see, just solid lonesomeness. Next you'd see a raft sliding by, away off yonder, and maybe a galoot on it chopping, because they're almost always doing it on the raft. You see the flash axe come down, and you don't hear nothing. Then you see that axe go up again, and by the time it's above that man's head, you hear the ka-chunk. It took all that time to come over the water. So we would put in the day, lazying around, listening to the stillness. Once there was a thick fog, and the rafts and things went by, was a-beating the tin pans, so that the steamboats wouldn't run over them. A scow or a raft went by so close we could hear them talking and cussing and laughing. We heard them plain, but we couldn't see no sign of them. It made you feel crawly. It was like spirits carrying on that way in the air. Jim said he believed it was spirits. But I says, no, spirits wouldn't say, "Darn the darn frog." As soon as it was night, we would shove off again. When we got her out to the middle, we let her alone, and let her float to wherever the current wanted her to go. And then we lit the pipes, and dangled our legs in the water, and talked about all kinds of things. We was always naked, night and day. Whenever the mosquitoes would take us, for the new clothes Buck's folks but for the new clothes Buck's folks had made for me was too good to be comfortable. Besides, I didn't go much on clothes, nohow. Sometimes we'd have that whole river all to ourselves for the longest time. Yonder was the banks and the islands across the water, and maybe a spark, which was a candle in the cabin window, and sometimes on the water you could see a spark or two, on a raft or a scow, and maybe you could hear a fiddle or a song coming over from one of them crafts. It's lovely to live up on a raft, or probably to live up on a raft. Could be both. We had the sky up there, all speckled with stars, and we used to lay on our backs and look at 'em, and discuss about whether they was made or only just happened. Jim, he allowed they was made, but I allowed they happened. I judged it would take too long to make so many, and Jim said the moon could have laid them. Well, that kind of looked reasonable. So I didn't say nothing against it, because I've seen a frog lay most as many, so of course it could be done. We used to watch the stars that fell too, and see them streak down. Jim allowed they got spoiled and was hove out of the nest. Once or twice a night we would see a steamboat slipping along in the dark, and now and then she would belch a whole world of sparks up out of her chimneys, and they would rain down on the river and look awful pretty. And then she would turn a corner, and her lights would wink out, and her powwow would shut off, and leave the river still again. And by, her waves would get to us, a long time after she was gone, and joggle the raft a bit. And after that, you wouldn't hear nothing, for you couldn't tell how long, except for maybe frogs, or something like that. After midnight, the people on shore went to bed, and then, for 2 or 3 hours, the shores was black. No more sparks in the cabin windows. These sparks was our clock. The first one that showed again meant morning was coming, so we hunted up a place to hide and tied up right away. One morning about daybreak, I found a canoe and crossed over a chute to the main shore. It was only about 200 yards, and paddled up a mile or so up a creek amongst the cypress woods to see if I couldn't get some berries. I was just kind of passing a place where a kind of cow path crossed the creek, and here comes a couple of men tearing up the path as tight as they could foot it. I thought I was a goner, for when anybody was ever after anybody, I judged they was after me, or maybe Jim. I was about to dig out of there in a hurry, but they was pretty close to me by then, and sung out and begged me to save their lives. Said they hadn't been doing nothing, and was being chased for it, and there was men and dogs a-coming, and they wanted to jump right in, but I says, "Don't you do it. I don't hear the dogs and horses yet. You've got time to crowd through the bush and get up the creek a little ways, and then you take the water and wade down to me and get in. That'll throw the dogs off their scent." Well, they done it, and as soon as they was aboard, I lit out for our towhead. In about 5 or 10 minutes, we heard the dogs and the men way off, shouting, and we heard them come along towards the creek, but they couldn't see, and they seemed to stop and fool around for a while then, as we got further and further away all the time, and then we couldn't hardly hear them at all. By the time we had left a mile of woods behind us and struck the river, everything was quiet, and we paddled over the towhead and hid in the cottonwoods and was safe. Well, one of these fellows was about 70 or upwards, and had a bald head and very gray whiskers. He had an old battered slouch hat on, and a greasy blue woolen shirt, and raggedy old blue jean breeches stuffed into his boot tops, and some home-knit galooses. Well, no, only one, just a galoose, I guess. He had an old long-tailed blue jeans coat with slick brass buttons flung over his arm, and both of them had big, fat, ratty-looking carpetbags. The other fellow was about 30, and dressed about as ornery. After breakfast, we all laid off and talked, and the first thing that come out was that these chaps didn't know one another. "What you got into trouble?" says the bald head to the other chap. "Well, I've been a-selling an article to take the tartar off the teeth. It does take it off, too, and generally the enamel and all with it. But I stayed about one night longer than I ought to, and was just in the act of sliding out when I ran across you on the trail side of this town. And you told me they were a-coming and begged me to help you get off. So I told you I was expecting trouble myself. and I would scatter out with you. And that's the whole yarn. What's yourn? Well, I've been running a little temperance revival there about a week, and was the pet of the women folks, big and little, for I was making it mighty warm for the rummies, I tell you, and taking as much as $5 or $6 a night, 10 cents a head, till the niggers friggy. And the business is growing all the time. And then when somehow or another a little report got out around last night that I had a way of putting in my time with a private jug on the sly. And they rousted me out this morning, told me the people was gathering up on the quiet with their dogs and their horses, and they'd pretty soon be along and give me about half an hour's start, and then run me down if they could. If they got me, they'd tar and feather me and ride me out on a rail, sure. I didn't wait for no breakfast. I weren't that hungry. Old man, says the young one, I reckon we might double team it together. What do you think? I ain't undisposed. What's your line, mainly? You're a printer by trade. Do a little patent medicines. The theater, actor, tragedy, you know. Take a turn to mesmerism and phrenology when there's a chance. Teach singing and geography school for a change. Sling a lecture sometimes. Oh, I do lots of things. Most anything that comes handy. So it ain't work. Now what's your lay? Well, I done considerable time in doctrine. Laying on of hands is my best hold for cancer and paralysis and such things. I can tell a pretty good fortune when I got somebody along to find out what the facts for me is. Preaching my line too. And working camp meetings, missionarying, all around. Nobody never said anything for a while. Then the young man holds his sighs and says, Alas! What are you alassin' about? Says the bald head. To think I should have been leading such a life, to be downgraded into such company? And he begun to wipe the corner of his eye with a rag. But darn your skin, ain't the company good enough for you? Says the bald head, pretty pert and uppitish. Well, yes, it is good enough for me. It's as good as I deserve. For who fetched me so low when I was so high? I did that myself. I don't blame you, gentlemen, far from it. I don't blame anybody. I deserve it all. Let the cold world do its worst. The one thing I know, there's a grave somewhere for me. The world may go on just as it's always done, and take everything from me. Loved ones, property, everything. But it can't take that. Someday I'll lie down in it and forget it all, and my poor broken heart will be at rest. And he went on a wiping. Drot your poor broken heart, says the bald head. What are you heaving your poor broken heart at us for? We ain't done nothing. No, I know you haven't. I ain't blaming you, gentlemen. I brought myself down. Yes, I did it myself. That's right. I should suffer. Perfectly right. I don't make any moan. Brought you down from where? Where was you brought down from? Ah, you would not believe me. The world never believes me. Let it pass. 'Tis no matter. Secret of my birth. Secret of your birth? Do you mean to say... Gentlemen, says the young man very solemn, I will reveal it to you, for I feel I have confidence in you. By rights, I am a duke. Jim's eyes bugged out when he heard that, and I reckon mine did too. Then the bald head says, No, you can't mean it. Yes, my great-grandfather's eldest son was Duke of Bridgewater, fled to this country about the last of the century to breathe the pure air of freedom, married here, and died, leaving a son. His own father dying about the same time. The second son of the late Duke seized the titles and estates. The infant real Duke was ignored. I am lineal descendant of that infant. I am the rightful Duke of Bridgewater. And here I am, forlorn, torn from my high estate, hunted by men, despised by the cold world, ragged, worn, heartbroken, and degraded to the companionship of felons on a raft. Well, Jim pitied him ever so much, and so did I. We tried to comfort him, but he said it weren't no much use. He couldn't be much comforted. He said it was mine to acknowledge him. He said if we was a mind to acknowledge him, it would do him more good than anything else. So we said we would. He would just tell us how. So he said we ought to bow when we spoke to him and say, Your Grace, or My Lord, or Your Lordship. And he wouldn't mind it if we just called him plain Bridgewater, which he said was a title anyway, not a name. And one of us ought to wait on him at dinner and do any little thing for him that he wanted done. Well, that was all easy, so we done it. All through dinner, Jim stood around and waited on him and says, Will Your Grace have some more of this or some more of that? And so on. And the body could see it was mighty pleasing to him. But the old man got pretty silent by and by, and didn't have much to say, and didn't look pretty comfortable over all that petting that was going on about the Duke. He seemed to have something on his mind. So long in the afternoon, he says, Looky here, Bridgewater. He says, I'm natural sorry for you, but you ain't the only person that had troubles like that. No. No, you ain't. You ain't the only person that's been snaked down wrongfully from a high place. Alas. No, you ain't the only person that's had a secret at his birth. And then, by jinks, he begins to cry. Hold, what do you mean? Bilgewater, can I trust you? Says the old man, still sort of sobbing. To the bitter death. He took the old man by the hand and squeezed it and says, That secret of your being, speak it. Bilgewater, I am the late Dauphin. You bet you, me, and Jim stared this time. And then the Duke says, You are what? Yes, my friend. It is too true. Your eyes is looking at this very moment on the poor disappeared Dauphin. Louis the 17th, son of Louis the 16th, and Mary Antoinette. You? At your age? No. You mean you're the late Charlemagne. You must be 600 or 700 years old, at the very least. Trouble has done it, Bilgewater. Trouble has done it. Trouble has brung these gray hairs and his premature balditude. Yes, gentlemen, you see before you, in blue jeans and misery, the wandering, exiled, trampled on, suffering, rightful king of France. Well, he cried and took on so that me and Jim didn't know hardly what to do. We were so sorry and so proud. And proud he got with us too. So we set in like we done before with the Duke and tried to comfort him. But he said it weren't no good, weren't no use. Nothing to be dead and done with it all could do for him. Though he said it often enough to made him feel easier and better for a while, people treated him according to his own rights and got down on one knee to speak to him. And always called him Your Majesty and waited on him first at meals and didn't sit down in his presence till he asked them. So Jim and me set the majesty in him and doing this and that and the other thing for him and standing up till he told us we might sit down. This done him heaps of good. And he got so cheerful and comfortable. But the Duke kind of soured on him. Didn't look a bit satisfied with the way things was going. Still, the king acted real friendly toward him and said the Duke's great-grandfather and all the other Dukes of Bilgewater was a good deal thought of by his father and was allowed to come to the palace considerable. But the Duke stayed huffy a good while, till by and by the king says, Like as not, we got to be together for a blame long time on this here raft, Bilgewater. And so what's the use of your being sour? It'll only make things uncomfortable. Ain't my fault I weren't born a duke. Ain't your fault you weren't born a king. So what's the use of worry? Make the best of things the way you find 'em, says I. That's my motto. This ain't so bad, this thing we've got struck here. Plenty of grub and an easy life. Come, give us your hand, Duke. Let's all be friends. And the Duke done it. And Jim and me was pretty glad to see it. It took away all the uncomfortableness, and we felt mighty good over it, because it would have been a miserable business to have any unfriendliness on the raft. For what you want above all things on a raft is for everybody to be satisfied and feel right and kind toward the others. It didn't take me long to make up my mind that these liars weren't no kings nor dukes at all, but just low-down humbugs and frogs. But I never said nothing, never let on, kept it to myself. It's the best way. Then you don't have no quarrels, and you don't get into no trouble. If they wanted us to call them kings and dukes, I had no objections, as long as it would keep peace in the family, and I warn't no use to tell Jim, so I didn't tell him. If I never learnt nothing else out of Pap, I learnt that the best way to get along with his kind of people was to let them have their own way.